And we should be live. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. And welcome to this webinar hosted by Workflex on cross-border workforce compliance trends for 2025. Based all on this report, we'll get to it a little bit later. You've probably read it in PDF. I got the luxury position of having it in hard copy here, the good old days. So let's quickly jump into whom we are before I start too long of a story. Starting with myself, my name is Pieter Mande. I'm Dutch. And that's why this funny I is in between the P and the E. It's totally normal for us. Might be surprising for you. I'm a tax lawyer originally. Worked for a pretty long time at PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, first here in the Netherlands, then in Germany, always in the area of global mobility. My last role was with PwC just before the Vialto carve-out. We'll get to Vialto in a second. I was responsible for the remote work proposition of PwC Germany. And then I started a little bit over 3 years ago now, Workflex. And Workflex is building a global mobility compliance platform. We've started with workation compliance. We've added business travel compliance. We've added commuter compliance. And we continue to add global mobility use cases to our platform to, at the end of the day, really become a global mobility compliance platform. So very heavy on tech, making your life easier if you are a large international employer. So that is me. And I've brought two amazing people with me today. And the first one I actually worked with back in the day when Vialto still was PwC. Christine, may I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Peter, and hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here today. So my name is Christine Kraft. I work as a senior manager for Vialto Partners with more than 20 years of experience in global mobility services. Saying that makes me feel really old, but my background is in global mobility tech services and also global compensation and payroll services. And I focused on the last 2.5 years on a very important topic, which is also really close to my heart, and which is sustainability. So here I worked out for Vialto what the impact of global mobility is on sustainable aspects and also how sustainability can be integrated in our global mobility activities. And finally, how we can translate also the sustainability goals, which might already exist in our companies, to a global mobility day-to-day business level. Some more words about Vialto Partners. Peter already mentioned it. So Vialto is a global mobility consulting company with innovative technology, and we are focused on licensed consulting services for cross-border compliance and risk management for all kinds around global mobility. So it's tax, it's social security, immigration, business travel, compensation and benefits, and remote work. So the whole bunch of consulting services. And Vialto Partners had previously been operating inside the PwC network, I think for the last 50 years, as Global Mobility Service Business Unit, and is now since April 2022 an independent, agile and globally scaled firm, which with the investment and the operational support of CD&R. Small fun fact about me, I'm a miller's daughter, so I grew up in a family business and we produce 100 tons of flour each day. The mill is powered by the energy of water, so really sustainable. And I love to go climbing with my family in the mountains, and I'm a passionate dancer. So my goal for today for this session is to provide some insights and some sustainability impulses for our global mobility network. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I haven't really seen a lot of the dancing part, but I have eaten from what you have produced at the mill. So back in the day, that was lovely. Yeah, really cool intro. Thank you very much. And then the second guest for today is Paul. Paul, can I hand over to you?
Absolutely. Slightly intimidated to be following up Christine's introduction because I haven't been in mobility as long. I don't have as interesting an upbringing, and so generally feel like an imposter next to Christine. But I'm Paul, co-founder and CEO of Perchbeak. We're a modern relocation management company. So once you have your sort of compliance sorted, we handle all the logistics of actually helping people relocate around the world. So everything from finding a house, shipping their staff, getting immigration, through to settling into their final destination. So obviously we've seen that compliance is a sort of an increasingly worrisome topic for global mobility leaders. So looking forward to diving into that a little bit today. And we're often working with quite tech-forward mobility programs that are interested in some of the newer trends within the compliance space, like workations and business travel compliance, etc., that are just very, very prevalent. So yeah, looking forward to a great session today. Thanks for having me on, Peter, and apologies for those. I know my photo makes it look like I carry a parrot around with me everywhere, so to those of you that came for that, apologies, I don't have a parrot with me today. Maybe next time.
Yeah, just tiny little bit of disappointment here on my end, but it is what it is. So how old is Perch Peak now, Paul?
Great question. So we're about 5 years old. So we started in the global mobility world just before COVID. We actually started because of my personal experiences of relocating, and it was so fragmented and having to organize everything in so many different places. So we were like, oh, what if we built one platform that as the relocator, you could organize everything? Then we realized that we were essentially a relocation management company, and entered the global mobility world about 3 months before the pandemic started at the start of 2020. So interesting time to join, but we've learned a lot over the last 5 years for sure.
I can imagine. Interesting. So it's actually the oldest company represented here today.
Yeah, that's
we are
true.
doing something wrong because we're at 70. You are at how many people, Paul?
Yeah, we're as you know, it's a bit of a funny combination, but around the 100-person mark.
Around 100, and then the
Vialto.
company that is just as old as Workflex, basically Vialto, you're at 7,000 people. So something is going way better at the Vialto side
Yeah,
than it is with us.
exactly.
Christina, how is life? Obviously, a carve out from such a big corporate, a 7,000 people startup. Were there really massive changes compared to your PwC history?
Yes, of course, there were changes. So from one day to the other, we also felt like a startup, which also brought all that new technology stuff with us. But on the other hand, I'm really happy because my team really remained the same. It's the same people, is mostly same clients, also new clients, of course. And now with the new investor, we also have the power to invest in new technology development, so which is also really important for us to serve our clients as good as we can. So therefore, I really enjoy it, and it's different now, but really good.
Amazing. Yeah, thanks. Pretty bold move back in the day from PwC/Vialto. So I think it's really cool. All right. So let's dive into it, but not without doing, I think, only just one household remark. Of course, Paul, Christina, and myself, we love hearing each other speak, but we're rather here for you. So if you have any questions, dear audience, we would be really happy to see those questions pop up in the chat. I hope that Jessica is the only one that can't hear us anymore. But if there's any questions or Mark, please put them in the chat. We will go through questions once they pop up, and once I'm, let's say, fast enough with seeing them and find a nice moment to include it. So really happy to take any questions in the meantime. Then we'll go through. So I think there might be some issues with sound left or right. Hopefully we can solve it, but at least it sounds like some people were still hearing us all the time. And that kind of tells me it's not on our end. So hopefully sound will improve for every one of you. And then we just go and dive in. So the whole reason for having this webinar is like I said, this report, Cross-Border Workforce Compliance Trends for 2025. If you haven't seen it yet or haven't read it yet, you can download it through the website. I think my dear colleague Liva, who is on this call on standby, will share a pop-up now where you can download the report. Really exciting. It's based on a survey under hundreds of global mobility and international HR specialists sharing their view and their perspective on challenges and cool opportunities in the GM world, basically. We've also used a lot of, let's say, workation and business travel policies for the information in the report. Plus, we've got a lot of specialists sharing their views, and Christina and Paul are actually two of them, but there's more. So really a round view on global mobility, and then mainly the trends for the near future. But maybe before we dive into three key trends that we've seen, by the way, in this report, I can already tell you those. It's compliance, it's cost sense, it's sustainability. Maybe we also take a sneak peek back into the last couple of years. Paul and Christina, be very happy to hear from you. What have you seen yourself as, let's say, the key trends over the past few years, instead of when we're just looking forward? Christina, would you mind going first?
Yes, sure. So from my experience, I would say one of the topics is the connection and the direct reporting within the authorities, which also increased over the years. So it's not only within the authorities, let's say tax and visa authorities within a country, but also the cross-border reporting of authorities, which I saw. And then on the other hand, I would say that there was really also a shift from only having the compliance on the employee side, but now a shift also to compliance on the employer side with payroll. So that means that not getting everything cleared then in the final tax return of the employee, but really looking also, of course, according to the pressure of the rulings which come up, that really the employer look if they can already have it correct, or a correct payroll through the year, or at the latest at the year end work. That's my observations.
Yeah, very good one. It's even something that we worked on together back in the PwC times, right? Focusing rather on the payroll for expats rather than just on the end of year personal income tax return, which is finalized so long after the year, actually. So yeah, I think it makes sense focusing a little bit more on, let's say, real time compliance. Very interesting. I think, I can only confirm that I've also seen that trend over the past years. Paul, what did you notice over the past few years?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for us during COVID initially, the big trend was global mobility teams suddenly having to deal with international remote work. In the report it says I think 59% of company surveys had some type of international workation policy. That was probably, I don't know, less than 5% pre-COVID. So that was a huge trend at first. Then I think over the last year or two, we've been hearing so many global mobility leaders saying, oh, now we're being asked to look after business travel compliance. And sometimes that business travel compliance can be a bit of a unloved child within organizations, and it sort of bounces between the travel team and then mobility, and increasingly mobility seem to being asked to help out, particularly in the compliance side of things, and linked between both of those two things is sort of mobility being asked to help out with more aspects of the business, whether it be business travel compliance, remote working, but not necessarily being given more resources to help out with that. So being asked to sort of help with more areas of the business with the same resources, and so they're trying to find ways to be more efficient using technology, and areas like that. So that's what we've seen on our side.
Yeah, thanks. It's a big con and a pro, right? I think really cool that I was in London last week at a fun event, and there I also was allowed to say a couple of words, and was happy to be able to share that. Look, I've been in GM for quite some time, and I think we have never been as strategically relevant as we are today, right? With so many new persona, like management being expecting us GM specialists, or you in the audience, to kind of make it work internationally or in whatever way, and compliantly, of course. That's exciting, but then obviously, it doesn't come at any extra budget or something like this. That's a little bit of a topic. Thanks for sharing. I think everybody in the audience will probably see this, will have experienced this themselves as well. And we'll get to talk to it a little bit more in the next, let's say, 45 minutes. Again, for anyone, if you've got anything to share in terms of a remark or a question, please feel free. The chat seems to be working, and I have also not seen any other complaints on sound. So fingers crossed that those issues were resolved. So back to now the trends for 2025. And like I already said, we're talking about three mainly, but there were a couple more in the report. And I'll just quickly go over them with you. So the top 5 challenges in global mobility for 2025, not surprisingly, compliance is lonely at the top, so to say, but followed by, I think the expected number 1 or 2, cost management and cost control, which both are the topics we will definitely cover today. Other challenges, quite interesting, is the effective coordination and communication between internal and external stakeholders, securely leveraging AI and technology for global mobility, and developing and implementing policies that align with business goals and global political changes. We've definitely seen a pretty significant political change over the past 24 hours. Whether you're happy with it or not, we'll probably see some changes. We did not prepare this or anything. Christina, Paul, is there anything that specifically in your area, in terms of sustainability or let's say international relocations, that you are expecting to be a lot better or a lot worse in the next couple of years? Paul, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think really what putting the sort of politics aside for a second, I think pragmatically what a lot of our clients are doing is trying to bring forward any of their US inbound relocations as quickly as possible. What we saw the previous time that Trump was in office was a lot more delays for H-1B visas. That's the most popular sort of visa type for our relocations. So in the very, very short term, a lot of our clients are really trying to see, okay, what can they push forward in the next couple of months before any more delays come in. Midterm, I think probably within the US, people are a little bit nervous about international relocation because of the restrictions on immigration. But then from a domestic point of view, if there is more sort of domestic manufacturing, higher tariffs, there might be a higher premium on domestic relocation within that space. With a more sort of fully global perspective, what we did see last time was at the margins, most of our clients operate globally, not just within the US. And so whereas maybe they would have predominantly focused on hiring into the US historically, maybe they were moving them to other hubs such as Dublin, Warsaw is becoming very popular. And so perhaps sort of slightly changing talent strategies based on where it's easy to relocate people. And that's something we very commonly do.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess, Christina, when it comes to sustainability, the new American president is not the biggest fan of it. So probably don't feel a lot of support in that. But I guess, of course, your clients are not necessarily dependent on the US president for policies like this. Nevertheless, do you expect a lot of change in this area, especially for sustainability in GM over the next few years?
Yeah, I think on one hand side, we already have some ruling which makes pressure on that topic. It's the CSRD, for example, but we also have seen in the last year also that in the US there was a ruling regarding scope 3 emission, and we always talk about scope 3 emission when we talk about emission of global mobility, which was skipped then at the end. So the big problem is that there's no harmonization at the moment of rulings on sustainability on a global base, and I assume that will also not change in the near future. On the other hand, there's so much pressure on the topic also from the society, from the employees, for example, who are working for a company and who want that the company takes also responsibility beyond their key activities, for example, that I think and I really hope that, of course, this will also have enough pressure to drive that topic forward and to make here really a change for all of us, for the planet.
Yeah, fair point. Maybe the fact that we shouldn't expect too much from let's say the largest economy in the world in this regard leads to increased individual pressure, saying, look, if it's not going to come from the top, maybe we push it from the bottom. Let's see, a good perspective. So before we dive into the three main topics of today, also sharing quickly from the report the top challenges companies face in managing specifically business travel. You can see them here, which with cybersecurity risks at the top. Sustainability in travel practices, the implementation thereof is seen as a big challenge. Of course, immigration changes, well, that will definitely not decrease over the next few years, not only because of the US expected change in policy, but also if you look at travel authorizations for the UK, the ATS coming up in Europe, there's, I think, in general, a global trend that goes a little bit more towards protectionism in this area, making it just more complex to get the immigration done. Adjusting business travel policies for remote is a pretty strong challenge. Political instability, adopting AI, and providing more flexible and personalized travel options. Very interesting trend into individualization in the area of global mobility. So these were the top challenges for business travel. Specifically, you can read more about them in the report, which you should have by now downloaded. But let's now spend some more time on the three key topics, the key challenges, so to say, or the key trends in global mobility for the next few years, starting with compliance. So last call out for any questions. Now we dive into, let's say, the more granular topics. So still happy to see any questions popping up in this regard. It's also the results from our survey that compliance with international laws and regulations is a key challenge in global mobility for the future. It probably already was in the past few years. And I guess it's a little bit related to, on the one hand side, regulations on themselves being complex. I mean, I went to law school a pretty long time ago. The fact that there are whole studies around the topic shows that it's apparently rather complex to comply with regulations as they are. And then, like you already said, Paul, over the past few years, there were all these new global mobility persona popping up, workationers, remote workers, etc. What did you hear back from clients around? Well, how did that not only increase their workload, but do you feel that it also increased the complexity of complying with local laws and regulations?
Yeah, I think definitely on the latter, just on the former in terms of increasing workload. I think often quite significantly. We heard from many global mobility leaders where maybe historically they help 3 to 10% of the employee population whenever it was just traditional relocations and assignments and so on and so forth, going up to as high as 50-60% whenever you have remote work. Is maybe not as much work per case, but just initially it's just a lot more work. I think in terms of complexity, definitely on remote work, the biggest challenge we heard was how compliant should we be, and because often people, if you really look at the letter of the law, it's sort of like maybe just don't let anyone work ever outside of the office. And I think for a lot of our clients, that was something that they really struggled with, was, okay, when we're providing a recommendation to the business, what level of risk are we willing to tolerate? And that varies so much depending on company size, where they're going, all of the things you can speak a lot more fluently to, truthfully. But that was something that I think people struggled with. And until some of the bigger companies started putting some stakes in the ground and saying, hey, we're happy to let people work for up to 30 days in as long as they have the right to work. People were very uncertain as to how to do it because there was no precedent, and it was pretty unclear what would be allowed by governments.
Yeah, thanks. Very interesting. And in terms of, let's say, willingness to maybe in compliant, I think with Germany, probably we've got a country on the call that is unlikely to be very willing to be in compliant. Christina, does what Paul said sound with you? Is this also what you saw with clients and knowing German companies very well? Their risk appetite for taking compliance risks was probably a little bit lower. What have you seen in terms of with your clients, with all these new GM persona popping up and the compliance becoming increasingly complex?
Yeah, so from my point of view, we receive many requests from clients regarding remote work, workation, and all that new kind of activities. From my personal perspective, it's not because the employer wants to offer that to the employee, but because the employee is really forcing that flexibility from the employers at the moment. So this is why employers are requesting us, okay, how high is the risk, which are countries where the risk might be lower or the risk is as too high. So that's really not driven by, or not that much driven by, the employers, but I think more because of the request of the employees. And yes, it's really complex, that topic, because it has so many facets or aspects which have to be considered. It's not only wage or income tax, it's social security related, immigration, EU post-worker directives, which has to be considered, or the generation of permanent establishment. So it really has many aspects which with which the employer has to be compliant, and therefore requests are there. But as Paul already said, they are only willing to some a certain amount of days to allow that or to accept it, if they accept it at all, or if they offer it at all.
I think Peter, if I could just add one thing to what Christina said there, is a lack of understanding from employees as to why why they can't just work anywhere was quite a big challenge for companies, because obviously at the start of the pandemic people just were sort of being reactive, and I think that's something a lot of our mobility teams and we were trying to help clients with is, okay, how do you educate the employee base as to why there are certain restrictions in place? And it was almost a communications challenge. There was like the upfront challenge of, okay, what are we going to allow, which was technically hard from a compliance. Then when you made some decisions, it was, how do we communicate that to the company and actually get them to understand and actually get them to follow what we said? And that was something that a lot of clients struggled with and are still struggling with, truthfully.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think I agree with everything you just said. It's indeed employees pushing for more flexibility here, and of course, compliance department being a little bit hesitant. What I think contributes to the complexity is also that obviously the rules that are applicable in terms of posted worker notification, like you mentioned, Christina, but also especially permanent establishment when people are temporarily working from abroad or permanently working from abroad. Well, they are obviously not written for today's reality of work, so to say. And I've seen very little, let's say, initiatives, national or supranational in the legislative area to kind of make it a lot clearer. So that's obviously the struggle, the balance that all of you, GM specialists, need to somehow figure out. Employees pushing for more flexibility, and then old-fashioned regulations kind of holding you back, making it very, very unclear. I think, Paul, the UK government has been, well, it's relative, but quite progressive in terms of, let's say, adapting legislations or policies to the new work reality. Do you still see this? Was it even part of the budget last week? I don't know whether it was included, but can you share your 2 cents on this?
Yeah, I think they certainly, relative to a lot of Western democracies, being quite progressive in terms of allowing for people working remotely within the UK, essentially saying, creating the infrastructure for it to be allowed to do so. And that's definitely been one of the things I love about our industry, is like the different approaches, not just the UK, but other countries have taken, so many proactively trying to welcome people in and make it as easy as possible to say, hey, whether it be nomad visas or elsewhere, basically say, hey, we want you to be able to work remotely here, versus other countries that are, hey, if you even think about working remotely here, we're going to try and tax you or call out permanent establishment. And it's been like a real dichotomy between seeing the approach of governments as well, which doesn't really help clients when they're trying to set up policies to deal with it, because it's, governments are constantly changing and have completely different approaches. So yeah, but the UK is pretty friendly.
And I think it's really cool to see, even though, look, it's only just one country, and we've seen a lot of countries coming up with these digital nomad visa, which are a great initiative, but in fact, they all discard a permanent establishment. So they're usually just a show of success, or at least a nice intention. Bottom line, not having the biggest impact, I think. Thanks very much for those who are sharing their remarks in the chat. I see Jonas and Monica, Christina, adding quite interesting comments. I don't know if you've read them, but what Jonas says is, well, when we're talking international remote work or workation, try to moving most of the liability to the employees. And Monica even said, we ask our workationers, so to say, to sign a certificate that in which they acknowledge that any tax implication would actually lie with them as a, let's say, a tax lawyer or a GMM specialist. How do you feel about those suggestions?
Well, I think, of course, it's not possible to push back all the, yeah, let's say, sorry, I forgot the word. So there are also many rulings or many things which the employer has to realize. It's regarding wage tax withholdings, for example, and things like that. So of course you can sign something, but that will not let you out of all the sorry, I really have to look.
Liability, you mean?
Liability. Thank you so much. So yeah, that will not let you out of all the liabilities you also have from an employer perspective, because we always have the two things, tax or obligations on employee perspective, but then also for the employer one. And yeah, it's really complex, and therefore it's always worth to ask someone who can also support you on the employer part and to show you the risk. Because there are countries where it's not really a problem, but there are enough countries where you have special obligations, which is on documentation, for example, or things like that. So this is really where you should also, as an employer, know which countries have high risk or low risk to yeah, to send your employees out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think very, very good point. And Jonas, I see you asking also, like, would be a little bit interested in knowing more about like tech and platforms. So don't want to do too much marketing today, but go visit getworkflex.com, because this is exactly what Workflex was built for. Yeah, and just to add on what you just said, Christina, of course, it's technically interesting telling workationers, look, all the risk lies with you, but well, you already addressed PE, permanent establishment risk, which is a corporate tax. A corporate tax has nothing to do with the employee at the end of the day. So you can, as much as you want, try to, let's say, put that responsibility or that liability on the individual, but that's not how it works, unfortunately. Tax authorities will definitely come to you as a company, and it even goes as far as with the visa. If the employee doesn't have the right to work in a particular country, the workationer, of course, that's a problem for him or her, because he'll or she will be put back on an airplane home. But if you're getting caught, what you're technically doing, and I don't want to make it sound worse than it is, but you're actually technically enabling illegal labor. And illegal labor is very heavily penalized, not only for the individual, but also for you as a company. So yeah, I think we see companies in practice putting the liability on their employees. Unfortunately, that's not really how it works, but there are solutions, thank God for this. And I think it's really important for an employer to at least take part of the responsibility there.
Peter, can I ask you a quick question there? Because I think this is your real area of expertise. But we often see, even if you look through the comments, see a lot of listeners trying to sort of roll out policies that they can explain simply to their employee base. 40 days, must have the right to work, whatever it might be. I think what you're saying is there's so much nuance. It depends on where the person has the right to work, depends on what type of work they're doing. Do you generally see clients going for quite a tailored approach based on their individual request, or having success with the sort of boilerplate, this is our blanket policy? Like, which method do you see more of?
Yeah, I think very good question. Thanks for it. Love you moderating. Yeah, I've seen success all across the board, to be honest. Of course, I'm personally more a fan, and Christina will probably agree with me. I love a individualized approach, because if you look at the taxes, they differ per trip, very strongly per individual. So from that perspective, it doesn't really make sense going with one solution should fit all. So I would prefer this, but I've also seen that one size fits all is the one that I meant, actually. I have seen it working in practice to a certain extent, and it's also justifiable from my perspective. If you've got a very large population, then sometimes it just doesn't work having a individualized policy. I still think you should always individually assess a workation request, but then I've seen it work. And what do all, let's say, policies that worked in practice have in common? Has nothing to do with the policy. It has everything to do with communication. Just being clear on why duration limited, why destination limitations, why is the process the way it is? Why can't we just let you do whatever you want to do in life? I think communication is more important than the policy, to be honest. If you want success, if you want to enable it, you need a policy, and you need a good one. But super important is then the communication afterwards. So also looking at the time, maybe just one quick question, I think, to you first, Christina, from Jonas. Thanks again, Jonas, for your questions. Really good. Are you aware of any recent cases where an employer has been taken into court for any such international remote work breach, either by authorities or employees? It's probably a yes or no question. Christina, have you heard of cases already backfiring big time?
Not from my clients, to be honest. So I can't tell you anything about that. Yeah. But of course, we have where we always see topics, and which is the most critical one is with visa topics. If this is not in line, there is a really tough and really that depends on the country, of course, where you are, but that can only let you to show up in prison at the end of the day if you don't get right with your visa stuff. So this is really something which is not a funny topic, and therefore it's always worth, as I said, to contact a consultant first. And what we offer for clients, for example, often is something like a traffic light overview, which really shows countries where it's where you don't have any trouble or low risk, and where are the countries where you have to be more visible, or where you have to more obligations for you as an employer, but also for an employee, to really have here a safe guidance, which countries can be used or not for that kind of activities.
Amazing. Thanks. Let's go to the second main challenge, costs. And well, Paul, I think you are, when you look at the round here, the puppy in global mobility, at least. So coming from the outside in, you must have been extremely surprised how terrible GM is actually at getting inside in all the costs, right? I've been around for quite some time. And I think GM is one of the few departments, to be honest, where a return on investment is absolutely inexistent, or at least it was never calculated. So it might be there, but nobody knows. Coming from the outside in, how have you what's your opinion on cost management and control in the GM area?
Oh, yeah, definitely surprised in the first instance. Most of the time I initially came from a more of a sales and marketing background, and then an engineering. And most of the time, if you ask the head of marketing how much they're spending a year, they'd be able to give you a pretty good a pretty good read on it, and it's normally budgeted. Whereas see, mobility is a sort of array of costs across tax, immigration, shipping, compliance, housing, and all of those costs hit at different times. And I think to the point we mentioned earlier, with mobility teams being asked to do more, they sometimes are then asking, hey, can we have more headcount? Can we invest in technology? Can we improve our policies, whatever that is? And then, business leaders normally ask, okay, what's the ROI going to be? And so often leaders can't even say how much they're spending on mobility, and so often that's because the costs are trailing very far down the line, particularly for taxes. And I think that's something that increasingly so many clients have such a big cost focus when it comes to not just mobility, but other pieces, that to justify investment in the function, you've got to be able to give a pretty clear idea of what business goal that's going to generate. That's normally either saving costs or increasing revenue ultimately. And for mobility leaders, just trying to understand what is our total expenditure is so challenging, because it comes at different times and has so many different vendors. And we've again, not to market too much, we're releasing some functionality at PerchPeak to try and help with that. But I think just generally for heads of global mobility, having visibility of the spend is the first challenge, even before then trying to control it, because that's the platform to justify increased investment into the function.
Yeah, thanks, sir, very much. I think very interesting efforts to try to get some let's say better feel as to the cost. So you were only recently only in GM for a couple of years, but Christina, you were honest and you already admitted that you've got a couple of decades in GM. What is your take on GM spend, and how surprised are you still with GM having so much trouble getting, let's say, a real grip on the cost?
Yeah, I think from my point of view, international assignments, for example, has always been very cost extensive. So I think at the very beginning, it was always said that if you have the wage for 1 year for an employee and you multiply that with 3, then you have the costs for an international assignment at the end of the year. And I think it's still really a challenge for many countries, for many companies, the structure, so that, for example, business is sending out someone and is not informing HR, or only informing after the assignment or the business trip has already been done. So I think this is still something which is really challenging and which is also affecting the costs at the end.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, well, at least for what WorkFlex is doing, we don't really care about global mobility cost. That's not the problem that we solve. But I think, Paul, the problem that the PerchPeak is solving is definitely related to this. But what happens, at least for WorkFlex, what's helping us a lot is technology, saying, look, I can kind of imagine that getting a grip on cost was difficult back in the day because there were so many different providers, even more different systems where costs would pop up. Is that something that you also, let's say, leverage at PerchPeak, saying, look, now that we've got more technology in place, getting a grip on cost should become easier?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that vendor consolidation is a big piece. You're trying to do something similar in the compliance world of saying, hey, we can handle all these different tasks, similar to us in the relocation world, and saying, hey, this doesn't have to be going to 10 different places. You can use technology to house all of your costs so you can see in real time. If it hits at different times, that's one thing, but you can at least use technology to have instant visibility, see reports, and even analyze why is there a sudden spike? Why are certain countries spending more than others per employee, whatever that might be? And I think that's an area that was challenging in a more fragmented world. With technology, you can really bring that to the fore.
Yeah, I think so too. I hope so. Let's see if it works. Question for you, Paul, from Jonas. Thanks again, Jonas, for the question. Just to get the definition or the basics right, what would we actually consider the cost of global mobility?
Yeah, great. great question, and it's not always the same for every program or every HR leader, but typically the holy grail of what most leaders we work with are looking for is all costs related to cross-border or even domestic relocations within. So what is included within that? Within a relocation bucket, that's going to be any allowances to do with their relocation, lump sums, shipping costs, housing costs, flights. And even within that, you see some of the difficulties because sometimes travel will be booked with the travel provider, and temporary accommodation, you might have corporate rates, so they can get separated. So that's within the relocation bucket. Then typically you would throw on top of that immigration costs, so the cost of visas, the cost of renewals within that program as well. And then the third typical big wing for us is the tax costs. So both in the first instance, any briefings or tax return costs, which is quite common for people relocating, but then eventually your sort of corporate tax costs as well. And they typically live all over the place, and clients want to be able to see it all in one place, which is what we hope technology can help to do in the future.
Yeah, thanks. And not only from all over the place, you already mentioned earlier trailing costs. That's, I think, a very big pain. It's basically costs that come in after the assignment has already ended. So the individual has returned home, but they need tax returns still, and that might take a long time in the former host country, so to say. So they not only come from various sources, they also can come. Well, what's the record you've seen in practice, Paul? Like the longest training cost ever? Christina, I'll also ask you this question.
Yeah, like, I mean, just as a norm, you'd be like the budget and the cost estimate can happen up front, and then they're going to be doing their tax return at the end of the assignment, maybe like 2-3 years later. So it can easily be 3 years up down the line that you're trying to like assign a cost to a relocation and say, hey, what was that there? So, but Christina, you probably have seen even longer in your career.
No, nothing to add. So I think that's on the point what you said.
Yeah, I've seen in practice already that we saw trailing costs for people that obviously returned from their secondment, but then already after a couple of years had left the company. So there were still trailing expenses coming in for someone who was no longer, let's say, recognized in the systems because he or she had left the company. So you see it.
Yeah, I'll add one more as well, which is sometimes when clients pay for storage for employees who then go on multiple assignments, and they just have sort of storage costs coming in every month. And we had one person that had been on assignment for 15 years, and it was like they were still not with us, obviously, but they were still just getting the storage costs every time. And you're like, wow, okay, just a monthly storage. And I can just see Jonas's question. In our world, not normally business travel, unless the mobility leader also fully owns business travel. Then they would try and get that cost in there as well. But for most of our clients, it's not the case.
Amazing. Thanks for answering that straight away, Paul. Yeah, really amazing. So looking at the time, I think we're very solid on time. Going through the last key topic, a very big challenge, I think, with everything in life, sustainability. So also in the area of global mobility. Maybe before we go into the slides that you actually brought with you, Christina, might feel a little bit hypocritical, right? We send people, especially Paul, we can blame you. We're really shipping people and all their goods over, so we're definitely not saving the world, are we? Should we be the ones worrying about sustainability nevertheless?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the blame for this one. Thanks for inviting me on. No, I'm joking. Christine can explain how we can do it better, but I think the thing that we see is, again, like the core of what we do is going to have an environmental impact. You know, like at the very least, someone is normally going to fly to their new location. They're normally going to, maybe rent a corporate apartment, maybe take a few boxes. That doesn't mean there's not lots of things you can do to really reduce the environmental footprint of your global mobility program. A couple of ones that we see clients do very successfully is just reducing the amount of household goods shipments. Like lots of people will ship their stuff if they're offered the opportunity to ship it, but if push comes to shove, they are quite happy to put it in storage or sell it and we buy in the new location, or reducing sort of old-fashioned look-see trips where people go, come back, and then there's lots of flying, and so there was like always some quick wins to reduce the footprint, rather than necessarily saying there's never going to be any impact of relocating people around the world.
Very good. Yeah, I think Christine is definitely going to agree with you on this one. Earlier you already said, Christine, that there's not necessarily a lot of regulatory pressure on sustainability in GM, right?
Not especially in GM, but of course, companies, according to the CSRDs, have to report on their emission. And according to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, the emission from global mobility is scope 3 emission, and this should also be reported. So according to the CSRD, now in 2025, it starts the reporting obligation for big companies, for example, and then at the end, in 2029, every company has this reporting obligations. And the thing is also, if you're not affected by the CSRD, for example, then you could be affected because you are in a supply chain and you have obligations to report to your supplier. So this is why it's really also important for global mobility to know what is your emission, for example, so that you are able to report on that. And coming back to your question, Peter, my first thought was, okay, do I have to quit my job when I think of sustainability, because global mobility is very CO2 intensive? But then I thought for myself, okay, no, why don't using the experience I have in global mobility to really look how we can also maybe get a transformation within global mobility to come to a more emission-less or a more sustainable, or to include more sustainable objects also in our global mobility work. And this is why I brought 3 slides with me, and I'm really happy that I can introduce that to you. So just to come in that topic and to show you the link between global mobility and ESG. So sustainability is not measurable, and therefore we have these 3 core angles, which are E, S, and G: environment, social, and governance. And what we can collect under the 3 angles of ESG from global mobility is on the environmental part. Of course, the question, what is the impact of global mobility on our planet? And here the most challenging and most important fact, of course, is the emission which is generated by global mobility. And here the focus should be on avoidance and reduction of emission. And at the very last step on the compensation of emission. I will come back to that later. When we talk about emission, I already said it's emission from traveling, from moving, household goods, for example, from waste management. But also if we look on business trips, for example, there's a big impact if we look on the structuring of a business travel. So if we rethink, for example, the frequency of business trips and also the duration of business trips, has also a big impact on the environmental aspect. If, for example, someone goes out each week for 3 days, is that really the best structure, or can he also go out only once a month, for example, for 5 days? So this has also an impact, and these are impulses which I would like to share with you to rethink your global mobility, but also your business travel structure, for example. And the environmental part, as I said, is the most challenging part for the global mobility network, according to my aspects. The social part is something what I realize that my clients are partly already aware of it. So we have topics here like talent management, which and the question is always, have you already realized that global mobility can also positively impact on the ESG goals your company has, for example, on a corporate level? Because you can also include global mobility in your talent management, for example. You can also look if the diversity strategy you have with your company, does that also be reflected in your global mobility or business travel population? Has everyone the same opportunities to access a business trip or also a global mobility assignment, for example? So we also have topics like equal pay on the social part. And the social part, of course, is all about dealing with people. So it's with your employees, it's with your customers, or also with your suppliers, for example. And this is where global mobility functions have heard of many of the topics, but as I said, you can also use global mobility here really to also use it as a positive impact on the social aspects. We also have the topic of well-being, which is really also a new wording, I would say, around the last years. And here also an international business travel, for example, can have a positive effect on the well-being of your employee. On the other hand, business trips can also affect the well-being of employees when we look again back to the duration, for example, or the frequency of business trips, which must not only be positive, but which can also have a negative impact if the business trip is too long, if people are not able to get good food during that business trip, for example. So this is also, has two sides of the medal, for example. And the last point, the governance one, is the one where I always say governance is all about compliance, and this is what we have already talked about. I think this is the point where most of the companies are already aware of and are already have providers by their hand, for example, to manage the compliance as good as they can. But at the very end, you see that balance. So sustainable mobility is really a balancing act. And it's not that with sustainability, we want to avoid or eliminate all business trips or all international cross-border trips at all. It's more about prioritizing and making data-based and also responsible and balanced decisions, and look how you can really integrate global mobility in the overall ESG strategy your company has.
Amazing. So as we go to the next slide, I can quickly answer the question from James that came in. Thanks, James, for the question on the standards that you report. And I think that we've just seen it on the previous slides. Obviously, emissions would be a kind of an expected one, but especially in the social area with equal pay, gender equality, diversity, etc. I think there's a lot more metrics that you can report on. Obviously, it starts with gathering the data. Yeah, very interesting. Christine, go ahead.
Looking on the time, I just want to make here a short deep dive when we look on the environmental part. So if you look on your business travel program, for example, then the question is always, do you need that business trip, or can it be replaced by a virtual meeting, for example? There you can really have a potential to avoid emission. Then we have the reduction. So if you have to go on business trip, must you go there by plane, or is it possible to also use a CO2 neutral possibility to come to your destination like a train, for example? So really reduce the emission. And then at the very last one, if you have to go to the US and you can't go by train there, then you can support your employees by the compensation of the emission, for example. And this is where I always would like to give you the impulse to start, okay, look, what is the business, or what is the life cycle of a business trip? Where does emission arise when you go there, when you have a flight, for example, but also the hotels you stay there, or the transportation then abroad. And then you always look, okay, do I have a greener or a more emission less option, or do I really have to do the business trip like I always did it? Of course, it's always helpful to use the data you already have from global mobility or from business trip to see where to start and where is my biggest emission during my global mobility program, for example.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Any last famous words on this slide, Christina?
Yeah, I just only pick up one or two. There are some market insights. So we really see at the market there is happening a lot, small steps, but there are steps. And I think this will increase in the future. So when we look at business travel, for example, business travel, we have that visibility of emission for booking travel. So we see that many companies offer that if you book a trips, they show you the emission, for example, when you go by plane or when you go by train, and that also empowers your employees to really make a sustainable choice. And you as an employer can, with your policy and with your travel guideline, you can also always show the employee what do you support from an employer perspective. And you can also, of course, animate or motivate employees to use a less emission powered way, for example, or way of travel. And we also see big companies who are making only or choosing only hotels, for example, who stay in a green initiative and things like that. So there's really something happening on the market which goes in the right direction.
Exactly. Yeah, thanks for this. I think we've all seen that trend, and it's not going to go anywhere. All right, amazing. So looking at the time, we started this live session exactly 1 hour and 1 minute ago. So sorry for overrunning for 1 minute. Thank you very much, Christina, for being here. Thank you very much, Paul, for being here, for sharing your thoughts and experiences and your vision. And thanks to all the people watching for being here. We hope it was insightful. Again, if you haven't gotten the report yet, you'll be able to download it through the website. And of course, the recording of the session is available for you as well. Thank you very much again to all of you, and I wish you a happy rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.